Maybe we'll start talking. This is No Direction Home. We'd like to thank Claire Oakley for joining us today. And the topic of conversation is your rather wonderful and wonderfully reviewed film Makeup, which was out July 31st, I believe, and then has been playing in cinemas and is kind of coming to the end of its run now. I think it's still playing in a few places, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And as like more independent cinemas open, it continues to kind of find a new life sort of wherever they're opening. But not that many places left.
Were you worried that your release was going to kind of fall during this period of cinemas being semi-closed, or are people allowed to go? I mean, was that something that was of concern for you and your team? Did you discuss like what the options were, or did it kind of come down to other factors outside of your kind of control?
Well, we'd always decided that it was going to be July the 31st when Curzon bought the film kind of back in November last year, and we just stuck with the date. Because they have Curzon Home Cinema, it was always going to get a release, and if cinemas weren't open at all by then, you know, it could still be released online. So we stuck with it, and then kind of got lucky in that cinemas did start opening, and are still opening. So yeah, it was kind of a good choice in the end, I think, and we got lots of great press, maybe more than we might have done otherwise, because you know it's a small film and I'm a first-time director, but we got a lot of press and a lot of great reviews, and I think partly because there wasn't really anything else coming out. So yeah, it's been good.
Well, I wouldn't put it all down to that. I think obviously it's nice that there are fewer films to review, but without embarrassing you, I'm just going to read a couple because they were rather superlative. So The Sexy Eerie Cornish Creeper is the British film of 2020 so far, which was Robbie Collins in The Telegraph. One of the best British films of the year, Dark Edge Seaside Tale, which was Time Out. And then Peter Bradshaw was very keen on it, Clever and Expertly Made. So I was just wondering whether there was any of the sort of the press that came out that was particularly sort of pleasing to you. I mean, I saw a really nice article with Little White Lies that you did an interview with. And was there anywhere that you were particularly sort of pleased or fond of kind of getting covered in, and what they were talking about in relation to the film?
It was, I mean, the reviews were all fantastic, and it was a real surprise because you never really know how it's going to go down. And we'd had a few reviews out of London and Rotterdam and South by Southwest where we played, and but actually the sort of national press on the release was much better than I expected. So it was really great. It was nice to get interviewed as well. I had an interview in The Guardian and one in the FT, Little White Lies, like you mentioned. And I don't know, it was a strange experience because they weren't just asking about the film, and until then I only, I'd done Q&As after screenings at festivals and stuff, and for 4 years been talking non-stop about the film. But then as soon as I was interviewed by the press, they were asking about me and where I'd come from and what I'd been doing, and so that was kind of a surprise. I was a bit unprepared for that. I don't know, for some reason I hadn't thought it through that they would actually be asking different kind of questions.
But I suppose that's because you had, without necessarily there being a direct or specific or autobiographical connection to the story or the themes of the film, there is a connection to your own kind of personal history. So I guess that was something that you might have suspected would be of interest to people, because it obviously comes back to why you as the filmmaker are interested in that particular subject, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a very personal film. It's not autobiographical, the circumstances and the characters and the location is all fictional, but the kind of journey that the lead character goes on and what I was trying to express there is personal to me. So yeah, I guess I should have seen that coming.
So just to sort of recap on the timeline of the film, I mean, maybe I don't expect that we're going to be talking about anything radically different to anyone else, but obviously just so we're all aware, this is a, you know, an audience of filmmakers, and so, you know, technical questions about lenses, which I'm looking forward to getting to, are all fine and dandy. But the film has been around in one form or another for quite a while. Can you take us through the kind of the timeline of it, like when you were first inspired, and I believe you went to a film lab that was part of its development as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so I started writing it as a short film, or some version of it as a short film sort of 9 or 10 years ago. And it was based on a dream that I'd had, which had really stuck with me. And I was in a foreign town following this girl with red hair through the streets. And it felt very important that I followed her, and yet I still couldn't catch up with her and couldn't see who she was. And that was the dream, and that was kind of what I wrote into what ended up being kind of a mood film. It didn't have much more of a story than that. And I took it on a lab called European Short Pitch. We all went off to Croatia, and was with a bunch of other short film writers and directors. It's a really good scheme if anyone's looking for stuff like that. We'd all read each other's work, and I arrived on the first day, and at the time I was in what I thought was a very happy heterosexual relationship, and I got talking to this guy on the first day, and he was like, "Oh, so you're a lesbian then?" Just assumed that I was, and I sort of took me a while to figure out what he was talking about, but he'd read my short film as a sort of expression of lesbian desire, which wasn't at all how I was thinking about it at the time, and those kind of ideas, thoughts had never really entered my head. So I thought he was pretty weird and maybe a pervert, and didn't speak to him for the rest of the week. And then things changed, like 5 years went by, and that happy heterosexual relationship became an unhappy heterosexual relationship, and I came out. And in the process of that, I kind of remembered back to that moment, and wondered whether this guy had been completely right, and I had somehow unconsciously written something about my own desires, without realizing it. And so that was enough of a spark to go back to the project and start developing it further, and looking into ideas of repression and how our mind plays tricks on us. And yeah, it sort of grew into a feature script, and then we started sending that script off. I tried to get it in with Microwave, which is a low budget scheme for emerging filmmakers. And I kind of messed up the interview for that. They'd read the script and liked it, put me in for an interview, but then whilst I was preparing for the interview, I reread the script and decided I hated it and it was terrible. So I went in and pitched them a totally different film, and they didn't really like that at all. They sort of got very confused. So that didn't work out. And then we sent it to iFeatures, and we did get onto that scheme, which is a sort of year-long sort of script development scheme. And we got greenlit at the end of that, and shot in sort of spring 2018.
Right.
We finished the film about a year later, and we premiered at London Film Festival, and it got bought by Curzon, and now we're here.
So there was actually quite a big gap of years between your initial kind of like sort of inspiration for it and then coming back to it. Is that right? There's a kind of a bit in the middle where you weren't working on it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I wasn't working on it. I was making other short films, and I was actually writing a different feature script with Torino Lab, which is another brilliant lab, and they sort of taught me how to write a feature script. It was the first one I'd written, and I sort of got to a point with that script where I think I had always imagined it as a writing project and like a way in which to teach myself to write. And when it got to a point of potentially being made, and at that point it was in development with Creative England, I kind of freaked out, and I don't think I'd never really properly imagined it as a film. And I sort of felt very nervous about it being my first feature. And instead of telling anyone, I just went and wrote something else, and that something else was makeup. Yeah.
Interesting sort of idea about the dream that you had, which obviously was so powerful that you felt sort of drawn back to it again, like after that period of time. I'm reading a book at the moment, like it's Sigmund Freud talking about the uncanny, and the idea of that being kind of the things that you repress is to do with repression. And obviously there's quite an interesting connection between that and horror, because obviously the idea that the uncanny is that kind of part of your mind that doesn't quite fully understand something that you're seeing, because maybe you've repressed your connection to it. So it was quite interesting that you mentioned that idea of repression in relation to the idea of genre, because I think that there is a connection there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I was very interested in ideas about the uncanny and sort of doppelgangers, and how something familiar to you or something that you feel is unfamiliar returns to you when actually it is something familiar that you've just repressed. And actually, I'm doing a talk at the Freud Museum at the end of the month as well. So I think that'll be quite interesting, because the woman who's kind of doing it with me is an expert on these things. So it'll be really interesting to hear what she has to say about it all.
Wow.
But yeah, I was looking at, I quite like reading kind of theoretical texts when I'm writing fiction. I don't really like reading other fiction or watching films particularly. I find that quite distracting, but I quite like reading theory, and especially if it's quite dense or quite boring. I find that often when I'm trying to focus on that, other ideas will sort of seep in, and I'll get sort of, if I'm stuck with a script or something and I go away and read theory, things will just start popping. So it's quite a helpful thing. So I did read quite a lot I read Freud's essay on the uncanny, and was reading about repression and stuff.
I think I have it here. So that's interesting to me, because the idea of being able to, it's almost like you're tricking your brain into being able to think about what you're doing, but in a different way. Like, I mean, I find going for a run, like, and I come back with lots of ideas because I'm not thinking about what I'm supposed to be writing. So do the theoretical texts that you read need to be related, or is it best if they're completely unrelated to the subject that you're working on?
I quite like them to be related, because then I feel like I'm working.
Okay.
And with makeup, I spent quite a long time at the Wellcome Collection Library,
Right.
reading about girls and desire, teenagers, and that sort of thing. And so that was quite fascinating. And there are a few things, I mean, nothing really directly gets kind of drawn into the script, but I think in some way or another it drip feeds in. There's like a line in Makeup where Jade says, "It's not about how you look, it's about how it makes you feel." And that sort of almost directly came from reading about how teenage girls had started in the 90s and 2000s, when being asked or interviewed about how they were feeling, they would respond with kind of how they thought they looked. And so there was like this confusion between, or them not being able to identify really their feelings, but being so sort of conscious of how they were appearing. So that line came from thinking about that. And so yeah, stuff sort of drips in, I think.
Well, I was just interested about some of the things that you mentioned in some of the interviews in terms of like your process. So, for example, like one of the things that you kind of credited as being influential to you was this photographer, Todd Hido. So I had a look at some of his photos. I wasn't aware of his work before, but I thought they were beautiful, very kind of atmospheric and sort of melancholy. So, I mean, I think that's quite nice in terms of speaking to a group here, as you are at the moment, who are attempting to kind of generate their own projects. It's really nice nice to hear about the things that other people find to be the sparking kind of device that allows you to sort of jump into subjects, but maybe not directly. So were there things that you saw in his work or other bits of influential sort of material, whether it's theoretical texts or other films that fed into makeup specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to remain quite clear and quite pure with the references. So really, it was just Todd Hiddo, and I have like a big book of his, and basically I watched It Follows, and read that the director of that had like walked into the room when he was pitching that film with a sort of one-page outline and a Gregory Crewdson photography book.
I was about to mention Gregory Crewdson. Yeah.
And I'd heard about that and kind of thought that it was a really interesting way of keeping yourself on one path, because with the other script that I'd written before makeup, I found that, you have different ideas every day and different ideas of how it's going to be or what it could look like. And as you're writing the scenes, that changes. And the fact that everything was changing all the time was kind of unhelpful. And I knew that when I got onto iFeatures, which is a very intense way to write, where you've got deadline after deadline and you're having to repitch the film every couple of months to a panel, I knew I had to kind of stick to one clear vision of the film and not let myself get taken down too many alleys, because I might end up with nothing or something very confusing. So I stuck with Todd Hiddo, and I sort of had his book open often on my desk as I was writing. And then when we came to start prepping the film, or when we were crewing up, I sent out the script to the crew and also a mood board that I made, which just had 6 pictures, almost exclusively by him. Although he doesn't take that many portraits, I had to put some faces in there. So I took them from Bill Henson. And we kind of stuck with that all the way. And through the prep with my DOP, Nick Cook, we looked closely at the Todd Hiddo images, and it was hard sometimes to recreate exactly what he does, because there's a lot of like mist and fog in his pictures, and we just didn't have the budget to create that on a sort of large scale outdoors. So we kind of tried to shoot when it was raining a bit, and tried our best, but it was very satisfying in Rotterdam when we screened the film, and one of the audience members was like, have you heard of a photographer called Todd Hiddo? Because I think you'd like him. And I was like, yes, we've accomplished that look. So yeah, it was just helpful with me for me sticking with like the mood of the film that I wanted to create. And his pictures are very subjective. One in the book, it sort of it questions whether his pictures are more of like a state of mind, and I liked that idea, and that the atmosphere and the place and the weather was going to replicate my lead character Ruth's state of mind, and sort of allow us to feel what she was feeling. Sort of bit of pathetic fallacy. I'm an English literature student, so it's sort of a common thing that people have obviously done for centuries, but I just really like the idea of using that.
So the nice thing I think about the reception to the film is that obviously you've got, for example, just to speak about casting for a second. So Molly Windsor was known from 3 Girls, but she'd also, I only just found out research today, had also been in Samantha Morton's The Unloved. So obviously that must have been when she was at quite a young age. When was the first time that you kind of came across her, and was there something about her that jived with something that you were looking for in terms of the performance you were trying to get in relation to your story?
Yeah, I mean, I did actually see her in Unloved, but you know, she was like 7 or 8 years old, so sort of it wasn't, I didn't remember that. But when I had written a draft of the script, I sent it to my casting director, who I've worked with on all my shorts, and so she knows my taste and the kind of actors I'm interested in. And she instantly sent me back a link to Three Girls. So I'd seen Molly quite early in the process, and then it was maybe even another year before we started casting properly. And we got a load of self-tapes in. And Molly's was really extraordinary. You know, she didn't go to acting school, and although she did start acting when she was very young, she is kind of relatively untrained. And I really like her style because it's very honest and very real. It's very subtle. And I felt that for Ruth, it was a kind of perfect match because it was really important to me that you wouldn't think that Ruth was in any way cunning or trying to manipulate the situation or actually knew her own mind. It's important that she's very naive and very honest. So, yeah, Molly's style and just seemed to sort of work perfectly. And then we met in person, and she really understood the script and understood the character and had lots of interesting questions and thoughts. And it was quite clear we were going to be able to work together very well. So it was great. I think we got very lucky, but it was really down to my casting director, whose instincts were like spot on.
But I was also very impressed with Stephanie Martini as well. I mean, who I obviously looking at her IMDb today, had seen that she'd been in quite a few things, but she came across as a very new and distinctive kind of sort of just face and voice and kind of, you know, the way that she was. I thought and that they worked together very well as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Stephanie was brilliant, and because when we were auditioning for that role, I wasn't sending out the script, we were just sending sides. And it was a scene where she paints Ruth's nails, and the kind of blurb was that she was a makeup artist. So a lot of people who came in with kind of a totally different type of version of Jade than Stephanie did. Stephanie's was like very grounded, down to earth, friendly, and quite a lot of the other people who came in were kind of doing more of a person who was like very concerned about her appearance or a bit prissy. And so Stephanie really stood out as having interpreted the character in a totally different way. And she's from the West Country, so there just felt something very real about her that I liked. And yeah, her and Molly got on very well.
But it's interesting that you mentioned about where she was from, because obviously the idea of the film initially, I believe, was that it was actually going to be set in a foreign country, not in the UK, and so the idea of Ruth coming from Derby, I believe, and so being a kind of a fish out of water with the kind of the Cornish locals was something that was kind of that you, I think, wanted for her character, for her situation, for her to be. And was that choice of Derby anything specifically to do with you, or was it just like a long way away from Cornwall?
It was just because that's where Molly Windsor's from.
Okay.
So she didn't have to change her accent, but it worked really well. And as you said, it was going to be set somewhere in a foreign country because the dream that I had was in a foreign place where, you know, you couldn't understand the language and didn't know where you were. So that element of it, where you're an outsider coming into a world where everyone else can, you know, converse, that was quite important. But then we got funding from Creative England, and it had to be set in England. It couldn't even be Wales or Scotland. It had to be England.
Right.
So Cornwall seemed like the most remote place I could think of, and you know, although not many people speak the language anymore, there is a dialect and some words have filtered in. So yeah, it felt like a great place for someone to come to, and it was just very convenient that Molly in reality was from, like, you know, 13 hours away or something. So yeah, we stuck with Derby.
If it's okay, what I thought I might do is just remind everybody. I'm sure everyone here has probably sort of watched it, but I thought it might be quite nice to just look at some images from the film, because I wanted to speak to you about your work with Nick Cook and your kind of preparation for like the visual style of the film. So I thought maybe doing the trailer now could like be a nice way to jump into that. Can I just check that everybody who's watching has got their microphones off? We're getting a bit of static on the back there. Who knows, maybe it's me. I may have a raccoon under my desk, we don't know. So what I'll do is we'll have a look at this trailer and then maybe have a quick chat, if that's okay, about some of the kind of the more technical and preparatory aspects of how you went about putting together maybe the visual style and kind of how that came about. So I'm going to share the screen now.
You scared of the water? The sea is a great healer. How long are you staying? Don't know. Your parents know you're here. You don't want no trouble. You know, I go with long red hair.
What did you just say?
Spinning electric shock. It's not about what it looks like. It's how it makes you feel. What's going on? I've seen someone in one of the vans. There's no one in those vans. There is. There's this girl.
She's got a bit of a reputation, you know.
Reputation for what?
Don't walk away from
I'm not walking away from you.
Sure about that?
What's wrong with you? Came here to be with you.
In Call Me By Your Name, Timothy Chalamet wore an earpiece while she...
Blimey. Okay. So just out of interest, had you worked with Nick Cook before? Was that a relationship that you kind of built up prior to working on this film?
Yeah, we worked together on a short documentary that I made. I met him for a short film that I was making years ago, but ended up working with someone else. But I really liked him, and he'd done some mood boards for the meeting, which were brilliant. And so then I was making a short documentary, which was kind of a commission thing by Universal Music, and got Nick on board that. So we'd done that together, and then we'd also I produced a short film by a guy called Tom Locke Griffiths, and it was a sort of essay film, and the whole thing was shot underwater. It was just really three of us making it, Tom, Nick and I, and we'd go out to the canals and just like plonk the camera in the water for a while. And it's a beautiful film, it's all sort of underwater landscapes. But we'd done that together, so I got to know Nick a bit. But I ended up meeting like 30 DOPs for makeup. It was kind of crazy because I knew it was going to be very important how it was going to look.
Yeah.
I don't recommend meeting 30 DOPs. You can't remember one from the other by the end of that. It's much easier to choose from 3 people than it is to choose from 30 people.
Well, I was going to say I had an interesting experience on my last film where I had a DOP who I'd known quite well socially but hadn't worked with, and then he couldn't do it, and so we ended up meeting 6 or 7 people, and the person that I went with was the person who came in and talked about character. as opposed to I see it like this, and steady cam and whatever, and so the person who came in and talked to me about story and how he saw the characters was the person that I immediately was drawn to, and so I think that for makeup particularly, it's obviously a very visual film, and there are certain things that I was interested in asking you about. For example, the color coding. So there's a scene where there are several moments in the film where the visual look is almost taken to a duotone. For example, when they first go into the arcade, and it's a very kind of like fluorescent blue, and then you have the scene. I won't give anything away, but there's a party scene at some point, and it all goes very kind of red. Were there specific colours that you were drawn to in terms of the storytelling that you wanted to do, and how did you talk about that with Nick?
Yeah, I had the idea that because in the script there was obviously this girl with red hair, and there was red nail varnish, there was the sort of lipstick mark on the mirror, which ended up being sort of clear, but in the script it was red. So from early on I had the idea that there were these sort of red kind of almost alarm bells, which were signalling Ruth's desire. And I kind of built that out. So when I did a draft of the script on the caravan park where we shot, because we secured the location about a year before we shot there. So I got to go there in the summer and write. And I was quite worried that it was very sort of monotone. There were these white vans, the grass was quite pale, the beach was very pale, the sky was often white. And in a story about sort of teenage desire, it felt important to have a lot of colour. And yet on the edge of every caravan, there were these bright red gas canisters. And I sort of had the idea that maybe we could have red in every scene that she feels desire. And in the scenes where she doesn't, there wouldn't be any red. So it gradually builds up through the film to the point where at the end of the film, as you said, at the party, it's like completely drenched in red. There's red smoke everywhere.
Yeah.
And she wakes up in the morning in red sheets. And but the earlier scenes in the film with Tom are blue and grey. In the caravan, it's all blue and grey, as you said, in the arcade. So yeah, that was the kind of idea, and we worked with the costume and production design department to kind of tag which scenes we wanted to have the colour red in and which we didn't, and whether there was a little bit of red and like one piece of costume, or whether there was a lot.
Yep.
So it was just quite fun to do it. I don't know if anyone would ever notice that, but maybe you sort of feel it on some level if you watch the film.
Well, I think the red, particularly, obviously, like the red nails, are very vivid, and they're very specifically put on her by Stephanie's character. So I think that those ones were something that you certainly noticed and start picking up on that. Was there a sort of a period of testing with Nick beforehand in terms of, for example, lenses that you were looking for? Did you go for antique glass or maybe something newer? And was there an aesthetic choice behind how you went about that kind of putting together the kit, if you like?
We didn't have any tests because, well, I think partly because we were shooting down in Cornwall, and we just didn't have time, perhaps, or didn't have the budget, perhaps. I'm not sure, but we didn't do any camera tests. But we did have some nice lenses, and I can't remember what they are, and Nick has told me like that they were used in some or another film, but I also can't remember what that is. I'm not very technical. We shot on an Alexa Mini because we wanted to make sure we could fit inside the caravans. And yeah, he picked some nice lenses. I don't know really what they are. Sorry to anyone who's fascinated to know that.
No, it's just one of those things that, if you're looking at the look of a film, it's kind of sometimes interesting to sort of know. Do you know about Shot Deck, that website that kind of gives you all of the lenses and the sort of the frame rates and everything of like lots of very well-known films? It was put together by a DOP who was working with I think Terrence Malick, but it's amazing. You have to apply and you can sign up, and it's a beta thing, but basically you can search for 35mm lens, night lit, backlit night shots, and all of these references come up. It's a really amazing resource. Did you do much storyboarding and kind of pre-planning, or do you prefer to sort of leave it to be on the location with the actors and then kind of block it that way? Is it, or maybe it's a combination of both for you? How do you play it?
Yeah, it was a bit of a combination. So we had to storyboard all the scenes that were in the sea, just for health and safety reasons.
Right.
We did have a stunt scene which didn't make the cut, so I had to storyboard that. But in terms of the kind of, and those storyboards kind of went out to the whole crew so that everyone could figure out what was needed. But in terms of a normal scene, sometimes I storyboarded that just for me and me and Nick, but nothing was going out wider than that. I mean, I don't know if anyone else would have made sense of it. They were kind of scribbled on a piece of paper. But no, the main prep that we did, that Nick and I did, was we went to the caravan park, I don't know, about a month before we shot, and we actually got snowed in. It was when it was the beast from the east. I don't know if you remember that winter, but we got snowed into the caravan park, which was great because we had even more time to walk through every single scene, and we had the caravan there already. Right. So we just took notes, and we walked through every scene, thinking of the shots that we wanted, quite freely, quite inventively, and came up with a lot of ideas during those few days, and made a lot of decisions. And it was really helpful because although it was just a couple of days, by the time we then were shooting and were on set, we both knew exactly what was happening in each scene or what the plan was. And then, the actors would come in and maybe have different ideas, or we'd have a new idea, and that was all fine. But we at least had a solid base, which was really helpful time-wise, because it meant that, the minute we walked to a new location or sort of into a new space, we could tell everyone quite quickly what was going on and what we wanted and what was going to happen. So yeah, that was the main prep, and it was kind of both in our heads. Nick did make a shot list, very thorough shot list of the entire film, but I think that was more for his own benefit, and also I think production were requiring it, but it wasn't really something I used. I kind of more had things really just in my head. Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, it's 22:08, and I think we have Claire for an hour. So what I was going to do was, in a minute, throw it open to some questions from everybody here. So what I'd like to do is, everybody's very welcome to turn their camera on if they can bear showing their faces in this private enclosed group, and then we can see you, and maybe you can raise a hand, and we'll get some questions for Claire. But what I wanted to do, if I could, was just to sort of ask one more question that I had about a specific shot, and to do with how you worked in post. So the shot I'm thinking of is one where, again, without trying to give anything away, I think it was in the trailer. So basically, there's a rear shot of Ruth, and in the foreground, something changes colour. There's grass that kind of changes colour, and I wondered if that was something that was planned, or whether that was something that kind of came out of a discussion in post, which might also have included your what would you call them? I kind of like sort of rogue style kind of dislocation kind of edits where you're sort of throwing in imagery, and I wondered if you could just talk a little bit, because I think it's a very it's a very visually arresting but also evocative technique, and specifically within the film. So I wondered if you could maybe just speak a little bit about the way that you found some of those elements and how you worked with them in post.
Yeah. The shot with the grass turning red, which actually some people have said that they thought that it was the grass kind of dying because it turns quite brown. Right. But it was meant to turn from green to red. That was in the script and was something that I'd written. It was always a dream sequence, but I liked the idea of trying to get inside her head, and at that point in the story, everything she looks at is sort of almost reminding her of this red-headed girl, and the grass felt quite like hair, and if it was going to turn red, that seemed to express quite a lot for me. So that was planned. And yeah, I think it worked quite well. It was actually quite simple in the end to shoot. We just shot a plate shot of the grass and shot Molly in front of a black screen, and they comped the two together, and we could choose. I could sort of play on the timings of how quickly it turned from green to red, and yeah, I was pleased with how that turned out. And with the other things, the little kind of like almost subliminal flashes of memory that she gets, that was something we found in the edit, and that wasn't in the script. And we were just playing around. To be open, both my editor and I were watching Sharp Objects at the time.
Right.
They do the same. They do the same thing, and occasionally they're using subliminal flashes, but then occasionally they'll flash back to a whole scene. And we both just thought it was a really interesting way to get inside Ruth's head further. So we started playing around with it, and it was great and quite fun. And so yeah, we managed to piece it together, just playing around. It was a really, I mean, I love the edit. It's kind of my favorite part of the whole process, because it's sort of like writing but with pictures. And so yeah, it was really exciting building that part of it. It kind of elevated the whole film, I think.
Yeah, there was so one of our previous guests, Mark Jenkin, who made The Wonderful Bait, talked about there was a moment where he was editing a scene. It's a scene where one of the younger female characters gets arrested, and he put a flash forward in of her hands being cuffed, and he said that really unlocked for him like a kind of a way of understanding what the film was. That idea of it being a rather than something being remembered, it was like a sort of a foreshadowing. And I think you had spoken about the kind of the Nick Rogue kind of Don't Look Now sort of as being a sort of a key film for you, I think.
Yeah, no, it's probably my favorite film ever. So yeah, the Don't Look Now. I mean, I didn't sort of go out to try and emulate it in any way. I think that would have been quite sort of silly. Yeah. But it was very satisfying that people kind of picked up on that as a reference. I was reading Nick Rogue's autobiography when we were shooting as well, so that might have had something to it. I'd really recommend the book. It's really very good.
What's the name of it? I know that you read it. I haven't actually put it up.
I don't know what it's called. He's only written one. It's a kind of memoir, I guess.
Oh, it's actually by him. Okay, right, cool.
Yeah, it's by him.
Cool. So what we'll do, if we've got some questions for Claire, I'm just going to put it on to speaker view, and so anyone who would like to ask something, please do pop their hand up, and then unmute your microphone would be the key next part of that. So it'd be lovely if we can see you all, if you don't mind putting your faces on the screen, and then we can all see who's here and get some lovely questions going. Oh, hello. So would anyone like to go first? Come on, Harley.
I've got I know what lens is now. I've just looked it up.
Oh, you know what, sorry?
I just looked up which lenses we've used.
Oh, go for it. What were they?
We used Canon K35s.
Okay.
Rehoused by TLS and provided by Take-Two. And Nick, this is from Nick, because I had to ask him this question for an interview the other day. He says, they give a softer look than modern lenses with flattering skin tones. Early on in pre-production, we thought there would be a lot of skin, and I guess there was. They have a creamy quality which reflects the looking at body tones. We didn't realize at the time, but they were most famously used in the Alien films. They've also been used in Manchester by the Sea.
Oh, the specific set of lenses that you were using were used on those films?
Apparently, yeah.
Wow, pretty cool. So I believe Harley has a question. You might have to unmute your microphone there, Harley. You got a little red line through you. There you go.
Right. Okay. Claire, can you talk a little bit about the casting process and then the initial rehearsal periods when you were first introducing the actors to each other and just seeing how you were going to work with the dynamic that actually developed between them?
Yeah, I mean, the casting process was very traditional, and we were just getting people in for interviews. At certain rounds, I was there, and I kind of was looking. I pinpointed with each character a sort of juxtaposition, I guess, of something kind of in their core. Like, for instance, I don't know if I can remember what they were, but you know, like Stephanie's character, like she was very confident, but she's, you know, dealing with something on the side, or you know, these kind of like things which I kind of was interested in the characters embodying, and I would just chat to them and watch and sort of see if I could see something in the character. So like with Stephanie, I felt that, you know, there's a line in the film about her having taken over her grandmother's caravan, and there was a sort of, I really liked the fact she was confident and happy, but there was something underneath that was maybe bothering her or that she'd sort of been dealing with recently. So I was trying to look for like these sort of, I don't know, soulful type of feelings whilst we were reading the lines. And I actually found the casting process, the final stages of it, really, really hard, because we had some really great actors and it was really hard to choose between them. In the final stages, once we'd cast Molly, we then did a chemistry test. We had 2 possibilities for Jade and we had 2 possibilities for Tom, and we did a sort of chemistry casting with each of them. So they met then briefly and just read some lines together, and then once we had cast, I didn't really have any rehearsal time. I had half a day. I had one day with Molly on her own, and I didn't really know her. I hadn't really, you know, I'd only met her through the audition. So on that day, we just sort of went on a long walk. We went for lunch, and then in the afternoon, we read through the script together and questioned any scenes that she didn't understand. And it wasn't sort of a rehearsal as such. It was more us building a bond and talking about the script. And then I had half a day with Stephanie and Molly together on the park. And again, it was so little time. It was actually ended up being just a couple of hours. And I didn't want to rehearse the scenes particularly because I didn't feel it was enough time to get past a kind of initial superficial reading. So we talked through the script and talked about scenes that they were worried about or had questions about. We talked about the sex scenes kind of up front as if they were any other scene. And then at the end of the day, I sent them off and they had dinner together, and sort of deliberately didn't go with them in the hope that they would chat away and get to know each other. And they sort of instantly became good friends, and that was very helpful for everyone. But they really supported each other through the shoot. And then with Tom and Molly, he was on another film, so he didn't come to set till 1 week into the shoot. So we didn't have any time with him and Molly together at all. They were just thrown together one day, or you know, the first day of their shooting together, and so that was totally up to that on them, and they just managed to make it work. That first day, their chemistry was so good. Molly's got a boyfriend, and I was like, God, that poor Molly's boyfriend, because these guys are getting on like a house on fire. And at the time, we were shooting all the kind of love scenes between them when they're happy. And then the following day, we were shooting the sort of other scenes, and I was like, I think they tricked me, and I think they just like, you know, they just done their job very effectively, and it worked. But no, we didn't sadly get any rehearsal time with them.
How open were you to some improvisation?
I always would listen to the characters, to the actors, and whether if they had ideas, I'd be up for trying it. Joe Quinn had quite a lot of ideas. He was sort of always had something extra that he wanted to bring to the scene, or an idea, or and they were often, we'd always try them, and then I'd make sure I also tried my idea, just so we had both an edit. But we didn't really do any improvisation. I mean, obviously, like the dance that he does is improvised, but in terms of dialogue, I don't think there's anything in the film that was improvised. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe occasionally we tried some, but I sort of, unless actors are very used to it and good at it, I find they just speak their minds, which is sort of gets rid of all those nice subtext that you want to have there if they're sort of voicing their thoughts. So no, we didn't really do much of that.
Well, did you regard the shooting process as an exploration or the execution of a master plan? How fixed were you into executing your vision or discovering something that you maybe hadn't thought of, where you might change the setup or even change the script? How easy were you about changing it through the process?
Well, what was quite exciting was after the first week, because I'd only shot shorts before, and the longest I'd ever shot was 5 days. And with a short, it's like a mad rush. At the end of the 5 days, you've got what you've got, and that you have to make a film from it. And at the end of the first 5 days of makeup, we still had 4 weeks to shoot. So it was this sudden sort of realization that I could change and morph the project as we were going along. And we would watch rushes every weekend in the local cinema. And that was really helpful because I was able to sort of see what we had, and we shot the whole thing on the same location, so it was very easy to go back and pick things up that we hadn't got or that I wanted to get more of, or reverse shots or little things like that were very easy to pick up. But in terms of the kind of project as a whole, I think it probably morphed and changed more in the edit than it did on the shoot. What I wish I'd been a bit braver with on the shoot was not shooting stuff that I didn't need. In the edit, when we did an assembly, I think we had like nearly a 3-hour film, and we ended up with like an hour and a half. So we cut a lot, and it would have, I don't know, maybe it's not something you can learn, but looking back, there were definitely scenes that we shot that we didn't need to shoot, and that if I'd really thought about it or been a bit braver, I knew they were never going to be in the film.
And did you feel that you hurried through some scenes, that if you had balanced your budget in terms of time, you would have rather spent the time on something that you really wanted rather than shooting a scene that you weren't going to use?
Exactly. And I know that you always shoot more than you in the final film, and sometimes that's really useful because some scenes that you hoped would work just don't work, or they end up feeling not part of the rest of the film. So it's useful to have stuff that you can just chuck. But yeah, it was frustrating in the edit where a really important scene had been rushed because we'd had to get to the location to shoot this nonsense scene that I really didn't need. But I think that's probably something that comes with experience. I was surprised in the edit that the kind of most important thing that seemed to dictate whether things would stay or be thrown away was kind of just the flow of it. And really in this film, that was to do with Ruth and her mood. So in the script, if I'd had her sort of quite sad and then she's happy the next scene and then she's sad again, that happy scene was gone, because it was very hard to kind of, you don't want to jolt the audience too much. It's sort of, the story works better if it just flows more steadily. So that is, I think, a lesson I could take into my next film.
Is that the biggest takeaway? Is that the biggest a realization you had that you learned from this first experience?
Well, that I'm particularly conscious of now because I'm writing again. But in terms of on-set experience, I don't know. I mean, hopefully I'll remember those lessons when I get back on set. Although, you know, it's already been 2 years nearly, so you know, hopefully I'll remember them.
Do we have any questions from anyone else who would like to jump in? Anyone got anything else they want to ask? I've got a couple more. Renzo, go for it. You have to unmute your microphone, dude.
Okay. Claire, I have a question about the Torino lab. You mentioned you got there. How much a lab like that helped you in this film? Like, at which stage you got there with the script, and how much it evolved there?
So I was on the lab with a different project.
Oh, yeah.
Project. But it was extremely helpful in terms of my progression as a filmmaker, because it basically taught me how to write. I didn't go to film school, and although I'd written short films, it's very different writing a full-length feature. And I sort of had worked in script development for years, reading scripts for film companies and writing coverages. So I'd read a lot of scripts, like literally thousands of scripts. And that, in a way, was my film school. But it's different when you go out and write yourself. So Torino was brilliant. You know, it's a very European sensibility. It's all about the work and the sort of creative impact of the work. It's not all about whether your film is going to make money or be entertaining. It's more about getting the message across and working with characters and having something to say. So I found that very refreshing. The teachers are brilliant. I mean, I'd recommend it to anyone. I think literally today I got an email from them saying that they are open for the next kind of slew of projects. So I would definitely apply. I mean, I applied with for that I applied just with a one-page outline, I think, and then over the course of a year we wrote a script. I wrote a script.
That also is a little bit like the similarity you mentioned to iFeatures, isn't it? Because iFeatures, you don't actually start with a script. You start with is it 3 or 4 page outline? It's something like that. So that's, I guess, a similarity in terms of how those programs work.
Yeah, the difference with iFeatures is that and it's changed now, so maybe it is quite a good learning experience, but when I did it, it was run as a competition, a bit like X Factor. So there's knockout rounds. They get 12 of you on board at the beginning, and then they knock it down to 8, and then you write another draft, and they knock it down to 6, and you write another draft, and it goes down to 3. So it's very competitive, terrifying environment to try and write in. So I was very glad that I'd already written something before and was a bit more practiced by the time we got to iFeatures and was under that kind of pressure. But they've changed it now because I guess they realised it was kind of mad. And I think they've taken the competition element out of it, and if you get onto the scheme, you're there for the year developing your project. So it doesn't have the same sort of nightmarish quality.
Right. Yes, because obviously a lot of the projects that get picked up after iFeatures, that they benefited from that development process. So that's a nice thing to be inclusive. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to ask Claire? Well, I have one more question, if that's okay. I was going to ask you about the sort of the strange situation that we all find ourselves in this Curzon release. I don't know how closely you were able to work with Curzon Home Cinema, but I wondered if you got to find out anything about this may be privileged information, I don't know, but about the number of people that have actually managed to see the film. Like, so obviously in a normal cinema release you would get publicly released figures, but obviously with VOD it doesn't really work like that. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what your expectation and maybe what the actuality of your connection with the audience for the film has been.
Yeah, I mean, I was, in terms of the connection with the audience, I was disappointed because the plan pre-COVID was to do what they did with Apostasy, and they've done with other first features where they take you on a sort of tour of the UK and you go to all the art house cinemas and do Q&As. And I really like that. I like hearing audiences' questions and, seeing how people have responded to the film. So I was sad to miss out on that.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether, Curzon seemed like deliriously happy with our results, although they sent us the figures and I'm like, how are you guys making any money? It doesn't seem to be like a lot of money. I think on our opening weekend we made like $8,000, which to me seems like nothing, but they seemed happy with that, and it seemed to sort of work with models of similar films that they've done in the past, despite the current climate. I think the online figures have been quite good. The cinema figures have obviously been terrible, but everyone seems happy about it, and I don't really mind. My whole thing was to get a good critical response, because I think that would help me with the next film more than anything else. Although, it would be nice to have this film wipe its own face kind of thing. But I have no idea how that happens. I think we made 30 grand so far, and so we've got a long way to go till we make 500,000.
Well, it's funny. I was actually we was talking with Mark Jenkin the night before he went into a meeting with Film 4, and they just found out that Bait had past the 500,000 mark, whatever it might be. I can't remember what the mark was, but it was a rather good one. And I believe that he successfully then went into that meeting or came out of it, I should say, with the offer that he was looking for. So it does have an impact, plainly. But I think that particularly for smaller, maybe more art house kind of releases, that the critical response may be, as you say, just as important. Absolutely. That does bring us on to as you mentioned it, the kind of the last question that I would have, which would be, what are you working on now, and kind of what stage are you at with it, and how are things going?
So I'm working on another script. It's an adaptation of this book called English Animals by a debut writer called Laura Kay. And I've been working on it for a while. I kind of came on board just before we shot makeup. And because I wasn't going to be available for a long time, we got a different writer on board. So she's done a couple of drafts. And now I'm jumping on and sort of, I guess, doing a director's pass on that work. This is how I write.
Uh-huh.
So that's like a pin board with like lots of, you can buy these like blank playing cards. And I sort of plot it all out there and then write it down. And I'm 3 weeks over deadline, but I finished it today. So I'll send it off tomorrow. So that's the next thing that I'm writing. I hope it will be my next film, but you never really know with these things. And I'm developing something else with the BBC that's kind of much earlier stages, but could be a sort of ghost story about the environment.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit there. Can you just repeat that last bit? You were saying the series with the BBC?
I'm doing something with them that it hopefully will be a sort of ghost story about the environment.
Wow. I don't know if anyone else has any more questions. If they do, please speak now. It'd be great if someone else wanted to ask. Oh, hi, Hannah. How are you? If anyone wanted to, well, I didn't see your picture before. You just popped up on the screen. You were just a name before. If anyone else has got any questions for Claire, please do let me know. And if we're kind of coming to the end, then what I would love you to do is turn your microphones off mute so you can say with me, thank you to Claire for joining us.
Woo! Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Claire. That was really amazing. Thank you so much. And it's really nice that Claire joined us because she is also part of a thing called Cine Sisters, which we didn't really talk about, but we can now for a minute. It was something that you founded back in 2014, I believe. So can you tell us what the kind of the goal of Cine Sisters is very briefly, and where your where your connection with it lies?
Yeah, I think we've got a Cine Sister listening in actually, Kate Cheeseman. You can see her name. But yeah, it started off with just 4 of us female directors sort of sitting in one of our sitting rooms and talking about how we could share experience and knowledge and sort of help each other get on in the industry. And then it's grown since then, and it's now nearly 200 people, and we meet monthly to share ideas. Each month's meeting is hosted by a different member, and with a topic about something that they're sort of currently dealing with, like how to find a producer, or how to work with cast of different acting abilities, or you know, and it could be anything. How to deal with depression between projects, or whatever it is.
Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at your depression. It just struck me as funny. Okay.
And then we discuss that topic, and everyone sort of tries to offer experience or advice, or and then it sort of breaks up into a kind of networking thing. We go around the group at the end, and everybody kind of asks, it says something that they need, like, you know, I'm looking for a DOP, or I need to find a studio space, and everyone tries to help each other with their needs. So yeah, it's sort of peer-to-peer networking, mentoring group. And we actually haven't been as good as you, because during lockdown we've not done any meetings, which is terrible. And we will be starting up again soon, but yeah, it's a lovely group.
Thank you. Well, yeah, we weren't actually planning to do stuff in lockdown, because I didn't want to, I suppose, go through the same thing that you were going through, which was to sort of, you know, have sort of, you know, an event or something that you planned and then not have people be able to show up in person, because I always felt that was a very important part of what No Direction Home did. But I think it's actually been quite nice. The last one we did was for Rob Savage's film Host, which obviously is a Zoom film. So that seemed like it was completely appropriate to do a Zoom meeting for that one. Yeah, we've got other guests lined up, including Prano Bailey Bond and Rob Morgan. So we're hoping to be able to speak to them. We'll see whether that's done in person or whether it's done in this perfectly fine fashion. We've I think come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us, Claire. That was really amazing, and I think the film was lovely. I hope that everybody has a chance to go and check it out. I watched it on Curzon Home Cinema, it looks like I'm advertising for them in the emails. I'm honestly not, but it was just like the way that I happened to watch it. We've been giving them a plug. But I really enjoyed it, and I would encourage everyone to go and check it out if they get a chance. Yeah, please join me in thanking Claire for being part of us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. It was really great. It was lovely to be answering such interesting questions.
Hopefully we'll all get to see each other in the face at some point soon. We're talking to the Hospital Club now about when we can go back and do some sort of, you know, face-to-face events. So hopefully that will be the case, and we can all go enjoy a beer together as opposed to sitting in our rooms on our own. God damn it! Thank you ever so much, everybody. Have a lovely evening, and yeah, we'll drop everyone an email tomorrow. You can pore over the recording. Thank you for your questions, Harley. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you.